"I'm fat," the obese girl cried, but Mountain Man smiled and said, "All I ask for is you." Colorado Territory, winter of 1881. The kind of cold that bit through wool and leather and went hunting straight for bone. Silverton's only saloon, the Golden Spur, was packed tighter than a cattle car. Men in sweat-stained shirts and whiskey breath leaned over railings and card tables, eager for whatever ugly entertainment the owner promised that night. On the makeshift wooden stage, under the yellow mean light of oil lamps, a young woman stood with her wrists tied in front of her. Rope burned her skin. Shame burned deeper. Abigail Abby Morrison, 23, tried to hold herself straight, but her shoulders kept curling in as if she could fold herself small enough to disappear. She was not small. She had never been small. Her dress strained across her soft stomach and wide hips. Seams mended so many times the thread looked whiter than the fabric. Her cheeks were round and flushed from crying. Her green eyes swollen and red-rimmed, her blonde hair falling loose from its pins in tangled curls. Around her, they laughed. "Horace, you sure you don't want to charge by the pound?" one ranch hand shouted. "You could retire off this one." "Them boards are groaning," another cackled. "Stage might give out before any man's pride does." The saloon owner, Horace Pike, slapped Abby's shoulder hard enough to rock her forward. His voice was loud, oily, made for lying. "Gentlemen, tonight's special. Abigail Morrison. Her pa died owing me more money than any sinner deserves to touch. She can cook, she can scrub, she can sew. Still untouched. One of you lucky devils can take her home for the bargain of a lifetime." Abby squeezed her eyes shut as a roar of laughter went up. "She's fat," someone sneered. "Ain't nobody that desperate." The words hit harder than any slap. Abby's throat worked. The sentence slipped out before she could bite it back. "I know I'm fat," she choked. "That's why no one wants me." Silence just for a heartbeat. Then the room exploded. "Hear that? At least the pig knows she's a pig." "Turn her round, Horace. Let's see what 50 extra pounds buys." Horace grabbed her chin, forcing her face up so everyone could see the tears streaking through dirt on her skin. "You hear that, boys? Even she knows she's a bad deal. So who's got the guts to take her anyway? Who's got $1 and no standards?" Abby wished the floorboards would open and swallow her whole. Her heart hammered so loudly she could barely hear the jeers anymore. Somewhere in the blur of faces and smoke and cruelty, she whispered to herself, so soft no one heard, "Please, somebody, anybody, see me as more than this?" The bat-wing doors slammed open. Cold air knifed into the heat of the room. Voices died mid-laugh. A massive silhouette filled the doorway, shoulders almost touching each side, snowflakes caught in the dark of his coat and beard. Every man in the saloon turned. The mountain had walked into town. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, blocking the doorway, chest rising and falling beneath a heavy fur coat, snow melting on his shoulders, boots dripping slush onto the saloon's floorboards. Men who 2 breaths earlier had been howling with laughter now stared like boys caught stealing. Caleb Thorne was a name whispered in Silverton. Some said he'd killed a grizzly with nothing but an axe. Others claimed he lived so deep in Elk Ridge that wolves followed him like dogs. No one knew the truth. But every rumor agreed on one thing. You didn't cross him, you didn't mock him, and you sure as hell didn't look him in the eye unless you meant it. Horace twisted toward him, blustering. Evening, Caleb. Didn't expect to see you in town. What brings you? Caleb's voice cut through the room like a blade. Untie her. Horace blinked. What? Caleb stepped forward. One step, then another. Every plank groaned under his weight. He was tall, 6'3", maybe taller, broad enough that even the toughest ranch hands shifted out of his path without thinking. When he reached the stage, Abby couldn't look up. She stared at the floor, tears dripping onto her shoes. She felt enormous, ridiculous, foolish under the gaze of a stranger. Caleb's tone didn't rise, but somehow it filled every corner of the room. I said, he repeated, untie her. Men exchanged looks. Horace laughed nervously. Now hold on, Caleb. This here's a legal sale. Girl owes me. Caleb's hand shot out, fisting Horace's collar, dragging him so close their noses almost brushed. The entire saloon went dead quiet. Debts die with the man who owed them, Caleb said, and her father is in the ground. Horace swallowed hard. Well, yes, but I fed her, clothed her. You chained her to a stage and sold her like livestock. Caleb released him with a shove. Untie her. Now. Horace scrambled, fumbling with the knots until Abby's wrists came free. Ropes fell away, leaving raw red marks on her pale skin. Abby cradled her wrists to her chest and whispered a trembling, "Thank you," without daring to lift her gaze. A man from the crowd called out, trying to regain bravado. "What you want her for, Thorne? Ain't your type. She's too soft for a man like you." Soft. The word stung in Abby's chest the way it always did. Caleb turned his head, slow, deliberate. "She's a woman," he said, "not for you to measure or mock." Someone else muttered, "So what, you buying her?" Caleb reached into his coat, pulled out a silver dollar, and held it up. The coin glinted in the lantern light. "I'm paying her debt," he said, "not buying her." Whispers rippled through the room. $1 was far more than Horace deserved, but no one dared argue the mountain man's generosity. He set the coin on the table beside Abby. Then he did something no one expected. He turned toward her, really turned, his body angled protectively, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "What's your name?" he asked. Abby blinked up at him. She hadn't heard gentleness in a man's voice in years. Abigail Morrison, but everyone calls me Abby." Caleb nodded once. "Abby, do you want to leave this place?" She stared at him, breath shuddering out of her lungs. I don't have anywhere to go." "I didn't ask where," he said. "I asked if you wanted to leave." Her lip trembled. Her world had been nothing but walls and cruel hands for so long she'd forgotten what wanting felt like. Then, quietly, she managed, "Yes." Caleb offered his hand, a huge, calloused hand, one that had clearly fought storms, carved wood, hunted game, and built a life alone in the mountains. Abby hesitated, staring at her own hand, round, soft, trembling. "You don't want me," she whispered. I'm fat." For the first time, Caleb's expression shifted. Not disgust, not pity, something warmer, something like surprise that she believed such a thing mattered. "I didn't ask what you weighed," he said. "I asked if you wanted to leave with me." Her breath caught. Behind them, men snickered. "Look at that. The fat girl thinks the mountain man wants her. She'll slow him down. He'll regret it by morning." Abby flinched at every cruel word. Caleb didn't. He angled his body in front of her like a shield and growled, "She walks with me. Anyone here got another damn word to say about it?" Silence. No one dared. Abby's heart hammered as she slipped her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers, firm, steady, warm. Something inside her shifted, something quiet, something breaking loose after years of being trapped under shame. Caleb helped her off the stage. He didn't drag. He didn't rush. He walked beside her as if escorting a woman who deserved dignity. At the door, he paused. Snow drifted outside. "Abby," he said softly, "you're coming home with me. You'll eat, you'll rest, and you'll heal. No one will hurt you again." She blinked up at him, tears spilling. "Why? Why would you help someone like me?" Caleb's lips twitched, a shadow of a smile under his beard. "Because," he said, "all I ask for is you." The snow fell in slow, heavy flakes as Abby followed Caleb out of Silverton. The cold bit at her cheeks, but she barely felt it. Her heart was pounding too loudly. Her breath came too fast, and every few steps she glanced at the massive man walking beside her as if he might vanish, and she would wake back on that stage. Caleb led her toward a sturdy buckboard wagon tied near the hitching post. Two chestnut draft horses stamped impatiently, steam rising from their nostrils. He helped her up first, not by grabbing her arm, not by pushing from behind. He lifted her with both hands, steady and respectful, as if she weighed no more than any other woman. She flushed, embarrassed by the ease with which he set her on the seat. "I'm heavy," she whispered. Caleb climbed up beside her, reins in hand. "Then it means you survived more winters than most." Abby stared at him. He wasn't teasing. He meant it. The wagon pulled away from town, rolling over snow-packed earth. Behind them, Silverton shrank to a cluster of lantern lights swallowed by darkness. No one followed. No one shouted her name. No one begged her to come back. The world behind her was silent. The world ahead was wild. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crunch of horse hooves, the hiss of wind along the pines, the soft creak of the wagon's wooden frame, it all blended into a strange peace she'd never heard before. Finally, Caleb asked, "You warm enough?" She tugged the blanket he had wrapped around her shoulders. Thick wool, smelled faintly of pine smoke and leather. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, eyes fixed on the road. 2 hours passed. The path grew narrower, trees closing in like cathedral pillars of snow-dusted green. The night deepened, but Caleb seemed to follow trails only he could see. Abby watched him surreptitiously, his hand steady on the reins, his posture solid, his jaw set with quiet focus. A man who knew the land like he knew his own name, the kind of man people feared, the kind of man she should fear. Yet she didn't. It confused her. "Caleb?" she said softly. He grunted in acknowledgment, a sound that meant yes. "Why did you help me? You don't know me." He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until she regretted asking. Then he said, "You looked like someone worth saving." Her breath hitched. "But I'm not." Caleb turned his head slightly, eyes glinting under the moonlight. "Who told you that?" She swallowed. "Everyone." "That's not an answer," he said. "That's a wound." The words pierced straight through her ribs. Abby stared down at her hands, small, soft, red from cold. "I didn't want to run. I didn't want to hide. I just didn't want to be bought like an object. I didn't want to be touched by someone who hated me." Caleb said nothing, but the reins tightened in his hands. She continued, voice trembling, "I know I'm bigger than other girls. I know men don't look at me the way they look at them. I know." "You know nothing," he said quietly. "Not about what men see, not about what I see." Her breath stalled. She dared look up at him. His gaze didn't waver. "You're not a burden," Caleb said, "and you're not something to be ashamed of." "Nobody has ever said that to me." "They should have." Abby looked away quickly, fighting tears. They slipped out anyway, warm on her cold cheeks. She turned her face so he wouldn't see, but he noticed. Without a word, Caleb slowed the horses. The wagon rolled to a gentle stop beside a frozen creek. He reached behind the seat, grabbing another blanket. He didn't drape it over her. He waited. "May I?" was written in his silence. Abby nodded, breath catching. Caleb wrapped the blanket around her shoulders with careful hands, his touch light, almost reverent. When his fingers brushed her arm, a warmth that had nothing to do with wool sparked through her. "You're safe," he said quietly. Not a promise, a fact. The horses snorted, shaking frost from their manes. Caleb clicked the reins, and the wagon moved again, climbing higher through the mountain pass. Hours later, lantern light flickered from a distant ridge, a cabin, large, solid, smoke rising from the chimney in a steady plume. Abby stared. "That's yours?" "Yes. It's beautiful." Caleb didn't react to the compliment, but something softened in his profile. When they reached the clearing, he hopped down and extended his hand to help her. She placed her palm in his again, hesitant, unsure why his touch steadied her more than the ground itself. Her boots touched the snow. The air felt sharper here, cleaner. Caleb lifted the supplies from the wagon. Abby stood there shivering, unsure what to do. He approached her, stopping close enough that his warmth broke through the wind. "Inside," he said. "You need heat." She hesitated. Are you sure I should be here?" Caleb angled his head, his voice a low rumble. "If I didn't want you here, Abby, I wouldn't have brought you." Her chest tightened with something terrifying, something hopeful. He walked toward the cabin door, then turned back once more. "Come inside," he said softly. "Rest, eat, heal." And for the first time since she could remember, she stepped forward not because she had no choice, but because someone wanted her to. The door swung open with a low wooden groan, and warm air rushed out to meet them. Abby paused on the threshold, breath catching. The cabin was nothing like she expected from a man who lived alone on a mountain. It wasn't crude or bare. It wasn't the shelter of a hermit driven half mad by solitude. Instead, it was lived in, cared for, the kind of place someone built with his own hands and refused to let time or grief ruin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. Thick rugs covered the floor, woven in deep reds and browns. The long dining table was hand-carved, sturdy, with small details etched into the legs. Mountain flowers, pine cones, the curve of elk antlers. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, jars of herbs, tools polished until they shone. In the corner sat a rocking chair with a quilt folded neatly over the back. Abby's eyes widened in awe. "It's beautiful." Caleb set down the supplies by the door. "It's practical." She shook her head softly. "No, it's beautiful." He didn't know how to answer that. Instead, he motioned toward the fire. "Sit. I'll bring supper." Abby obeyed, lowering herself carefully onto the rug near the hearth. Heat wrapped around her like a blanket. The flames painted dancing gold across the room. Something inside her, something cold and knotted, began to thaw. Caleb moved easily through the kitchen, as if he'd done this 100 times. Pots clanged, water poured. Soon Abby smelled something warm and gentle. Herbs, broth, onions, vegetables. A simple mountain stew. But after days of cold, hunger, and humiliation, the smell alone brought tears to her eyes. She wiped them quickly before Caleb returned. He handed her a wooden bowl, steam curling upward. "Eat slowly. Your stomach hasn't had a real meal in a while." She nodded and lifted the spoon. The first mouthful made her close her eyes. Warmth spread down her throat into her chest, unclenching the tight ache inside her. She kept eating, carefully but hungrily. Caleb sat across from her on the floor, his own bowl untouched, as he watched her with a quiet, unreadable gaze. "You cook?" she asked between bites. He shrugged. "Enough." "It's wonderful." He didn't reply, but something in his gaze softened. When she finished, he collected the bowl and washed it. He didn't tell her to rest. He didn't tell her what to do next. He simply let her breathe. Abby had never felt that kind of freedom. Later, when he returned from the kitchen, she was still sitting near the fire, holding her hands over the flames. Caleb crouched beside her. "How do you feel?" "Tired," she admitted, "but safe." The words slipped out before she could stop it. Caleb's eyes lifted to hers. He didn't smile, not exactly, but his expression gentled. "Good." He stood and brought over a pile of blankets and a long pillow. Abby tilted her head. "What's that for?" "You've been through hell. You need sleep." "Yes, but where?" Caleb straightened. "The bed upstairs is yours." She froze. "Yours?" "No." He pointed with his chin toward the far corner of the cabin. "Mine is here." There, against the shadowed wall, was a simple cot, bare except for a blanket neatly folded at the foot. "You're giving me your room?" she whispered. "Yes." "But you shouldn't. It's your home. I'd feel terrible." "You're a guest," he said. "I don't put guests on the floor." "But where will you sleep?" "Here." He tapped the cot. "Comfortable enough?" Abby bit her lip. "I don't deserve that." Caleb stopped moving. He faced her fully, shoulders squared, voice steady. "Abby, don't say that again. You deserve a bed. You deserve rest. You deserve warmth. That isn't up for argument." No man had ever spoken to her that way. Not demanding, not shaming, just certain. Her throat tightened. "Thank you." He nodded once, and the moment passed. As he led her upstairs, she noticed every detail of the space. A second rocking chair, a small writing desk with a half-finished wooden carving beside it, the bed itself, wide, carefully made, smelling faintly of pine and soap. Caleb paused at the door. "There are extra quilts in the chest. If the wind howls tonight, use them." She looked at him, unable to hide her vulnerability. "I don't want to be a burden." His answer was immediate. "You're not." "But I'm—" He cut her off gently. "You're tired. That's all. Sleep." Something warm twisted deep in her stomach. Caleb stepped back and let her close the door. Inside, alone for the first time since she fled the saloon, Abby pressed a hand to her chest. The room glowed with soft lantern light. Outside, snow drifted in slow spirals. Her legs felt weak, not from exhaustion, but from the realization that her life had changed completely in a single night. She washed her face and hands in the basin he'd prepared. She dried her hair with a linen cloth. She crawled into the bed, pulling the thick quilts up to her chin. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of safety instead of fear. Below, she heard Caleb's footsteps, slow, deliberate, steady, the sound of a man who knew how to be alone but had made space for someone else. Her eyes drifted shut. When morning came, she woke to the smell of frying eggs and a soft knock at her door. "Abby? Breakfast." She sat up, startled. I'm coming." Downstairs, Caleb had set the table for two. Eggs, biscuits, a jar of blackberry preserves, and steaming tea. Abby's cheeks warmed. "You didn't have to do all this." Caleb sat across from her. "I did." They ate quietly, but the silence wasn't the kind that suffocated. It was the kind that asked nothing of her. After breakfast, Abby stood. "Let me help, please." Caleb studied her carefully. "You can wash the dishes if you feel strong enough, but slowly." She nodded eagerly. And so the morning passed, washing, drying, sweeping. Caleb repaired a broken chair leg while she mended a torn sleeve. They worked in the same room, side by side, yet not entangled. Not yet. But something was growing. Something small. Something steady. Something warm as the fire in the hearth. When Abby accidentally brushed Caleb's hand while passing him a tool, she felt the jolt down to her bones. And when Caleb murmured a soft, "Thank you, Abby," his voice dipped in a way that made her knees weaken. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a beginning. The snow melted slowly in the weeks that followed, revealing patches of brown earth and the first shoots of spring. The forest outside the cabin stirred with life again. Birds returned, deer trekked through the tree line, and the world seemed ready to thaw after a long, brutal winter. But not everything thawed so easily. Some nights, Abby woke gasping, heart pounding, the echo of drunken laughter still ringing in her ears. She would sit upright in Caleb's bed, her bed now, hands trembling, breath shaking. And downstairs, without fail, she would hear his boots on the wooden steps as he climbed up to check on her. He never opened the door. He never crossed that line. He would simply speak through the wood, voice low and steady. "You're safe. Go back to sleep." And somehow, she always did. But Caleb had shadows, too. When he thought she wasn't looking, she saw the way his jaw tightened when he stared into the flames, saw how his eyes followed the old rocking chair in the corner, Sarah's chair, saw the way he ran his thumb over a worn carving on the table as if remembering the woman he'd lost. They were two people stitched together with scars, learning how to breathe again. And just when Abby began to feel strong enough to imagine a life here, planting a garden, making bread, stitching quilts, she realized she owed Caleb the truth. One late evening after supper, she sat with him near the fire. He carved wood. She gently folded laundry. Outside, wind whispered between the trees. "Caleb," she began, voice quiet but steady, "there's something I should tell you." He didn't look up. "I'm listening." She swallowed hard. "Wilson never paid $50 for me." His hands froze over the carving. Abby twisted the cloth in her lap. "Horace lied. My father owed him $500. When my father died, Horace said I was the payment. He planned to sell me to the highest bidder, not as a wife. As—" She couldn't form the word. Caleb's muscles tensed. "Say it." "As property." Silence thickened. The fire popped. Outside, somewhere far in the woods, an owl called. Caleb finally spoke, voice low and cold. "And Wilson, he didn't want a wife either." Her voice shook. "He wanted someone he could lock away, someone no one would miss." Caleb set the carving down and stood up so quickly the chair scraped across the floor. He paced once, twice, fists clenching and unclenching. Abby shrank into the blanket. "I'm sorry. I didn't tell you sooner. I was afraid that I'd send you back?" Caleb turned to her sharply. She nodded. He swore under his breath. Then, crossing the room, he knelt before her, not towering, not intimidating, just a man desperate to make something clear. "Abigail Morrison," he swallowed, "no one is taking you from this cabin, ever." Her breath shuddered. "But they might try." He didn't deny it. Instead, he rose, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a folded map. When he returned to the table, he spread it out, tapping his finger on a marked pass. "They'll come from the south. That's the only route passable this early." He tapped another mark. "And this ridge gives the advantage to anyone defending it." Abby blinked. "You're planning to defend my home." Caleb looked at her, eyes steady, voice iron. "To defend you." Her heart lurched painfully. "Caleb." He rolled up the map. "I know men like Horace and Wilson, greedy, drunk, violent. They're the kind who think women are things. They don't stop unless someone stops them." Abby wrapped her arms around herself. "I don't want you hurt because of me." Caleb crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. He took her face in his hands, carefully, almost reverently. "You didn't bring danger," he said softly. "They did." Her throat tightened. His hands were warm against her cheeks, grounding her. But the next morning proved how right he was. Caleb had gone to chop firewood behind the cabin. Abby stood at the kitchen counter kneading dough, humming absent-mindedly. The sun had just begun to rise over the ridge. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, slow, intentional, coming up the trail. Her blood ran cold. She ran to the window, and her heart stopped. Wilson, Horace, 3 more men, all armed. They dismounted, spreading out like vultures approaching fresh kill. Abby stumbled backward, knocking a cup off the table. It shattered on the floor. Wilson smirked when he saw her through the window. He tipped his hat. "Morning, sweetheart." Horace shoved the door. It rattled under the force. "Open up, girl. We're here for what's ours." Abby's legs trembled so violently she nearly fell. She grabbed a chair, heart pounding so loud she thought they could hear it. "Caleb, please, Caleb." But he was at the back of the house, too far to hear. Horace slammed the door harder. "We ain't waiting all day. Open it." Abby backed into the wall, chest heaving. Her eyes darted toward the rifle leaning near the hearth. She had never fired at a person, only at trees, at rabbits, at shadows. But these were men who wanted to drag her back to hell. Her hand trembled as she reached for the rifle. Outside, Wilson laughed. "If she thinks that mountain man is going to save her, she's dumber than she looks." Another slam. The wood cracked. Abby's breath came in ragged gasps. She raised the rifle, aimed at the door, not because she was brave, because she was terrified. And then a thunderous voice split the air. "Step away from my cabin." All 5 men turned. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, axe in one hand, rifle slung over his shoulder, snow melting on his coat, eyes blazing with something feral. Wilson sneered. "Thorne, didn't know you were keeping stolen goods." Caleb walked forward slowly, the earth crunching under his boots. "She's not stolen," Horace spat. "She belongs to me. She's under my protection," Caleb said, voice deadly calm. "Which means you get one chance to turn around and ride away." Wilson reached for his pistol. Or what? Caleb dropped the axe. His hand moved to his rifle. Or I put you in the ground. The wind held its breath. The forest froze. Abby stood inside, rifle shaking in her hands. Outside, Caleb and the 5 men stared each other down at the cabin door, and the ridge behind them swallowed the rising sun. The clearing fell into a silence so sharp it seemed to slice the morning air. Even the trees stood still, their branches heavy and unmoving, as if the forest itself understood what was about to happen. Wilson's fingers twitched above the holster at his hip. Horace shifted his weight, eyes darting between Caleb's face and the rifle strapped across the mountain man's back. The other 3 men formed a half circle, boots spreading in the snow, hands ready. Caleb didn't flinch. He stood tall, shoulders squared, posture steady like a man who had already made peace with whatever came next. His breath fogged in slow, controlled clouds. "You boys came a long way just to make a mistake," he said quietly. Wilson snorted. "Mistake? You've got something that belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone." Caleb's voice cut through the cold like the crack of an axe. "Not anymore." Inside the cabin, Abby pressed her trembling body against the wall, the rifle cradled tightly in her arms. Her pulse hammered against her rib cage. She could barely breathe. Through the window, she saw Caleb standing alone against 5 armed men. Her protector, her savior, her home. And she couldn't just hide. Wilson spat into the snow. "Step aside, Thorne. I paid for that girl." Caleb's jaw clenched. "You paid nothing but filth and sin, and if you think I'll hand her over so you can throw her in a cellar—" Wilson's grin split wide. "So you admit it? You want the fat girl? Hell, you can have her after we're done." Caleb moved first. The thud of his rifle hitting his shoulder echoed like thunder. He cocked it with a single smooth motion, barrel aimed straight between Wilson's eyes. "Finish that sentence," he growled. Wilson froze. Horace barked a shaky laugh. "Caleb, be reasonable. You're 1 man. We're 5. Don't be stupid." But Caleb wasn't looking at Horace. He was staring at the cabin door, at Abby, because she had moved. Her footsteps were soft but steady. The door latch clicked, and when the door swung open, she stepped into the light, rifle pressed to her shoulder, cheeks streaked with tears, but eyes burning with something new. Strength, fear, resolve. Wilson's jaw dropped. Horace swore sharply. Abby lifted her chin. "I'm not going back with you." The clearing grew still again. Wilson recovered first, his face twisting. "Put that rifle down, girl. You don't have the guts." Abby swallowed hard. "I do now." Horace took a step toward her. Caleb moved instantly, angling his body between them. "Touch her," Caleb warned, "and you won't walk out of these mountains." Horace's lip curled. "So that's how it is? You're going to die for a worthless—" The shot split the sky. Snow burst at Horace's boots. Everyone turned. It wasn't Caleb who fired. It was Abby. Smoke curled from the barrel of her rifle. Her hands trembled violently, but she didn't lower the gun. Her voice cracked, but the words were steady. "I'm not worthless." Wilson stared at her like she was a different person entirely. You actually shot." Abby breathed unevenly. "I missed on purpose." Caleb looked over his shoulder at her, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Pride. Fierce, quiet pride. Wilson took a slow step back, then another. "This ain't worth dying over," he muttered. Horace glared, but even he hesitated. 5 men against 1 mountain man was one thing. Against a mountain man and a woman willing to shoot, that was a different story. Wilson spat at the snow. "We'll be back." Caleb lifted his rifle higher. "Not if you cross that ridge again." The threat hung heavy in the cold. Finally, Wilson turned his horse. One by one, the others followed. 5 sets of hooves pounded down the trail until the sound faded completely, swallowed by the forest. Caleb didn't lower his rifle until they disappeared behind the last line of pines. Then he slowly turned to Abby. Her arm shook. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The rifle slipped from her hands and fell softly into the snow. Caleb stepped toward her. "You could have stayed inside," he murmured. Abby's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't. Not when they came for me. Not when you were alone." Caleb reached out, gently brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. "You're not the girl who ran from a saloon anymore." Abby swallowed hard. "I'm still scared." "So am I," Caleb whispered. "But you still stood with me." The wind brushed past them, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth, and somewhere deep inside Abby's chest, a new kind of strength settled, not borrowed, not forced. Chosen? "Caleb," she breathed. He stepped closer, jaw tight with emotion he didn't quite know how to show. "Abby, you're—" She lifted her hand and rested it on his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palm. "I'm here," she whispered, "and I'm not running anymore." Caleb closed his eyes just for a moment, as if absorbing the truth of it. When he opened them, something warm flickered beneath the steel. "Then come inside," he said quietly. "We need to talk about what comes next." The cabin door closed behind them with a soft thud, shutting out the wind, the threat, and everything that had tried to claim her. Inside, the hearth glowed gold, steady and warm, so different from the fear still shaking Abby's hands. Caleb took the rifle gently from her and set it aside. Then he turned back and really looked at her, her hair tangled from the wind, her cheeks cold-flushed, her breath trembling. Yet her eyes, those soft green eyes, held a fire even the blizzard hadn't been able to extinguish. "You shouldn't have come outside," he said quietly. Abby wrapped her arms around herself. "If I hadn't, they would have taken me." Caleb stepped closer. "I wouldn't have let them." She nodded. "I know, but I didn't want you standing out there alone. Not again. Not because of me." His jaw tightened, not with anger, but with something deeper, a kind of emotion he rarely let surface. "Abby," he murmured, "you're the first person who stood beside me in 7 years." She blinked. "Caleb." He reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. "When Sarah died," he began, voice low, "I thought whatever part of me could fight died with her. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life waiting for winter to take me too. Then you came crashing into my world like a storm I didn't know how to weather." Abby's lips parted. "I'm not strong like she was." Caleb shook his head. "You're strong in ways she never had to be. You survived a town that wanted to break you, a saloon full of men who wanted to own you, a blizzard that should have killed you. And today, you face the men who hurt you, and you didn't run." Her eyes filled. "I was terrified." "So was I," Caleb admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "But strength isn't about not being afraid. It's choosing to stand anyway." Abby's breath hitched. She looked at his hand on her shoulder, rough and warm and steady. "Caleb," she whispered, "what happens now?" He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat of him, smell the faint pine and smoke clinging to his clothes. He cupped her face gently, so gently she nearly broke. "What happens now," he said, "is up to you." Abby's voice trembled. "I don't want to leave." "You don't have to." "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You won't be." "I don't want to be alone." Caleb's forehead touched hers, his breath warm, words softer than the fire behind them. "You're not alone," he murmured. "Not as long as I'm breathing." A tear slipped down Abby's cheek. Caleb brushed it away with his thumb, holding her as if she was something precious, and she finally believed she was. Outside, the mountain stood tall and quiet. Inside, the fire glowed, steady and sure. Caleb pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "This cabin is yours," he said, "if you'll have it." Her heart throbbed painfully, beautifully. "This life is yours, if you'll take it." Her breath shook. "And my heart." His voice cracked, raw and truthful. "It's yours too, Abby, if you want it." She didn't answer with words. She stepped forward, closed the last inch between them, and let her forehead rest against his chest. His arms went around her immediately, strong, protective, unguarded. The fire popped in the hearth. The storm inside her quieted. For the first time in her life, Abby knew what safety felt like, and what home truly meant. Stories like Abby's remind us that even in the coldest winters of our lives, a single act of kindness can change everything. Somewhere out there, someone is listening from a kitchen table, a night bus, a quiet bedroom, or a crowded cafe, and somehow we're all connected by the same longing for hope, courage, and love that chooses us when we least expect it. If you're still here, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now? And if you still believe that even broken hearts deserve gentle hands, don't go far. The next story is already on its way to you.